The cypresses swayed gently in the cold winter breeze of Seattle, creating a constant whisper that filled the cemetery's otherwise silent air. It was a serene place, perched on a hill far removed from the bustle of the city. Victor Bailey stood under the grey sky, his eyes fixed on the mahogany coffin resting before him. Eleanor Hart, his wife and one of the most influential women on the West Coast, was now there, reduced to eternal silence. Victor wore a perfectly tailored black suit, but his mourning expression seemed as meticulously arranged as the tie he wore. There were no tears in his eyes, just the calculated weight of a man who knew what was expected of him. At his side, Emily Foster, his personal assistant, kept a few steps back, avoiding direct eye contact. She was young, with carefully styled blonde hair and a demeanor that wavered between respect and anxiety. Ethan Moore, Eleanor's nephew, stood a few yards ahead, surrounded by a small group of friends and family. He watched Victor with a calm that felt almost defiant, as though he knew something the other would rather keep hidden. Eleanor's relationship with Ethan had always been close, almost maternal. It was well known that she trusted him deeply, though she had never openly stated as much. Victor glanced around as the farewell speeches began. The mayor of Seattle, 2 CEOs of major corporations, and even a senator were among the attendees, all paying tribute to the brilliant businesswoman and philanthropist Eleanor had been. But Victor wasn't there for speeches or tributes. He was counting the minutes until the reading of the will. It was a moment he had been anticipating for years, a future of power, wealth, and prestige now within his grasp. Yet Ethan's presence and Emily's reserved demeanor were thorns in his mind. Something felt off. He realized this when Paul Gardner, the family attorney, approached at the end of the ceremony with an urgent tone. "Victor, I need to speak with you about the will. The reading is tomorrow at the courthouse, but there's something you should know beforehand," Paul said, his voice low but full of meaning. Victor nodded, keeping his expression neutral. He couldn't afford to show any anxiety. However, as Eleanor's coffin was slowly lowered into the ground, Victor felt a brief sense of unease. A fleeting, insistent thought, even in death, Eleanor still held the reins of the game he thought he controlled. As he stepped away from the grave, Victor noticed Ethan watching him again, this time with a faint smile. It wasn't one of sympathy, but something deeper, as if he already knew exactly what was coming. Victor quickened his pace, determined to regain control. After all, he had always known how to manipulate situations to his advantage. Eleanor, as shrewd as she was, couldn't defeat him now, he thought, but he was about to discover just how wrong he was. The next day, the streets of Seattle were slick with the city's characteristic drizzle. Victor Bailey drove his luxury car to the courthouse, his thoughts spinning like well-oiled gears. He had spent the night mentally reviewing every strategy, every argument he could use to secure control of the inheritance. Emily had encouraged him, whispering reassuring words as they shared an expensive bottle of wine in his apartment. "You deserve this, Victor." Eleanor knew it, she had said, her voice sweet and seductive. But now, as he climbed the courthouse steps, Victor felt an invisible weight pressing on his shoulders. Maybe it was the persistent gaze of Ethan at the ceremony, or perhaps it was the memory of Eleanor herself, with her shrewd ways and eyes that always seemed to see through him. The courtroom was vast and austere, its dark wooden walls and tall windows letting in the cold morning light. Paul Gardner sat at the table next to Victor, a stack of documents before him. Across the room, Ethan Moore sat alone, wearing a simple grey suit, but with a confident posture that seemed disproportionate to his position in the room. The judge arrived promptly, and the reading began with the expected formalities. Eleanor had left smaller legacies to a few friends and long-time employees, but when it came to the main distribution of her fortune, Paul cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses before continuing. "I, Eleanor Hart, declare that after much reflection, I have chosen to leave 70% of my fortune to philanthropic institutions. I wish for these resources to be used for educational, environmental, and public health causes." The silence in the room was so profound you could hear the sound of restrained breathing. Victor froze, his mind struggling to process the words he had just heard. 70%. Philanthropy. He leaned forward, his eyes wide, searching for any indication that this was a mistake. Paul continued, his voice steady. "The remaining 30% will be divided between my nephew, Ethan Moore, and a contingency fund managed by him. This fund will be directed toward projects that he deems aligned with the values I have always upheld." Fierce anger began to simmer within Victor, but he kept his face impassive. Ethan, on the other hand, remained calm, arms crossed, with a faint smile that seemed to say, "I told you so." "This is absurd," Victor exclaimed, finally breaking the silence. "Paul, this can't be valid. Eleanor and I were married. I'm the legal heir." The judge raised a hand, silencing Victor with a gesture. "Mr. Bailey, you'll have your chance to contest, but for now let the attorney finish." Paul took a deep breath and adjusted his papers. "Finally, I wish to make it clear that I made this decision fully conscious and after consulting legal experts. This reflects my intention to ensure that my legacy is used for the greater good, as well as to protect what I consider most important, the integrity of my values and responsibility to society." The word integrity echoed in Victor's mind like a silent accusation. He knew it wasn't a coincidence. Eleanor knew him too well, and this was a calculated move. As the session adjourned, Victor remained seated, his gaze lost in the distance. Ethan calmly stood and approached Victor. "You know, Victor, Eleanor always had a knack for seeing what others try to hide." Ethan leaned in, speaking just low enough for only Victor to hear. "Maybe you should have thought of that sooner." Victor clenched his fists under the table, his grip on his emotions beginning to slip. When Ethan walked out, the air in the room felt heavier, as though unspoken words had left invisible marks. Paul tried to smooth the situation. "We can contest this, Victor, but it'll be a long, difficult battle." Eleanor took legal precautions. Victor stood abruptly, his eyes darkened. "It doesn't matter how long it takes, Paul. I will win." He stormed out of the room, his mind already working on plans, unaware that the coming days would bring revelations that would shake the foundations of his life. That night, back in his sprawling modern home with glass walls and a stunning view of the Seattle Bay, Victor sat in his favorite leather armchair. The silence was oppressive. Emily had left after a heated argument over the reading of the will, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The day had been a disaster. Eleanor had humiliated him, even from the grave, with a masterful move. Now, he needed a loophole. Anything to dismantle that will. Frustrated, he began rummaging through Eleanor's old belongings, stored in the home office, searching for clues or documents that could help him. Opening one of the desk drawers, he found an object that caught his attention. A black leather journal with the initials E.H. subtly engraved on the cover. Victor hesitated, a chill running down his spine. Eleanor had never been the type to keep diaries or confide her thoughts on paper. Curious yet cautious, he opened the notebook. The first pages were simple notes about meetings and trips, but as he flipped further, the entries became more personal, more revealing. "Victor is ambitious but dangerous. He thinks I don't see his intentions, but I see beyond his facade. I found out about Emily. I hired a private investigator. I have proof." Victor read those words with his heart racing, blood rushing to his face. Eleanor knew. He hurriedly flipped through the pages, desperation growing with each line. "If something happens to me, I know he'll try to take everything for himself. That's why I trust Ethan. He's the only one who understands my desire to leave a true legacy. And as for Victor, he doesn't know what's coming." Victor slammed the journal onto the table and stood abruptly. The room seemed to spin. Eleanor had planned everything. She knew about his betrayal, his affair with Emily, and now those words made it clear she had prepared something more, something he didn't yet fully understand. His first reaction was to call Emily. He needed to confront her, to find out if she knew anything more. After a few rings, she picked up, her voice hesitant. "Victor, it's late. What is it? Did you know Eleanor hired a detective, that she had proof about us?" Victor asked, his voice sharp as a blade. There was silence on the other end before Emily answered cautiously. I heard rumors. Eleanor was smart, Victor, but I thought it was just paranoia on her part." Victor caught the hesitation in her voice. There was something more. "Don't hide anything from me, Emily. I need to know everything." "Look, Victor, Eleanor mentioned something about a safe, but I could never figure out what it was. It might just be speculation." Victor hung up without replying, his heart pounding. A safe. He had never heard of this before, but now it was clear Eleanor had hidden more than just an unpleasant will. Determined to uncover the truth, Victor returned to the journal. There was a mention of a private office that Eleanor had secretly used outside the house. He knew he had to investigate, but before plotting his next steps, he decided to put the journal away. However, as he hid it in a secret compartment of his drawer, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A yellow envelope already opened was stashed there, something he didn't recall seeing before. Inside was a photo. He and Emily, together at a discreet restaurant, in what was clearly an intimate meeting. On the back, there was a handwritten message, unmistakably in Eleanor's writing. "You've always underestimated my vision, Victor. Be careful." Victor felt the weight of the implied threat. Eleanor had anticipated his every move, and now he was trapped in a snare that even his cunning couldn't undo. Looking at the photo one last time, A deep unease settled in his chest. For the first time, Victor realized that perhaps he wasn't the one in control of the game. That night, the silence of the house felt colder, heavier, and in the midst of the darkness, Victor had a thought that would haunt him until dawn. Eleanor, even in death, was winning. The next day, the rising sun painted golden hues across the city of Seattle, but for Victor, the dawn was just another meaningless transition. After a nearly sleepless night, he drove to Eleanor's private office mentioned in the journal. It was an unassuming building, tucked away in a quiet area, far from the city's corporate buzz. The key was still on the keychain he had found in her home office. Eleanor, methodical as always, had left everything exactly in place. Upon entering, the smell of old paper and polished wood greeted him. The space was elegant and minimalist, with shelves full of books on leadership, economics, and, curiously, philosophy. Victor searched the office, moving books, opening drawers, and investigating every corner. At last he found the safe, disguised as a section of the bookshelf. It was modern, with a digital panel for entering a passcode. He paused, his finger hovering over the keypad. What would the code be? An important date? Something tied to Eleanor? After several failed attempts, he remembered something she always used to say. My greatest pride was creating a legacy that inspires. Inspired by the memory, he typed the word legacy. The safe made a soft click and opened. Inside were a series of carefully organized documents and a closed laptop. Victor grabbed everything, sitting down at the desk to examine the contents. The documents were contracts, financial reports, and most intriguingly, copies of messages exchanged between Emily and him, captured with a precision that left him speechless. But it was the laptop that held the real surprise. He powered it on and found a single folder on the desktop titled The Truth About Victor. He hesitated before clicking. Inside the folder were videos. One showed the dinner he had with Emily, where they discussed how they could manipulate the situation to be together and secure their position after Eleanor's death. Another video, secretly recorded, showed Eleanor speaking directly to the camera. If you're seeing this, Victor, it means you did exactly what I expected. Tried to deceive me. But I want you to know that, no matter how much you failed me, I hope you find something greater within yourself. The money you crave so deeply, sir, will never be enough to fill the emptiness you're creating inside of you. Victor shut the laptop with a loud thud. His face was pale, his breath coming quickly. He couldn't allow this to come to light. This evidence could completely destroy him, his career, his reputation, even his freedom. The sound of footsteps echoed through the office. Victor looked toward the door and saw Ethan standing there, his expression calm as always, but with something new in his eyes, determination. Did you think I wouldn't know you'd come here? Ethan said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. Victor stood up, trying to appear in control. What do you want, Ethan? Are you here for some morality theater? Ethan approached slowly, crossing his arms. No, I'm here to make sure you understand that you've already lost. Eleanor planned this to protect what she built, and you're not going to destroy it. Victor laughed, but the sound came out nervous. You think you can stop me? You're just a boy she spoiled. You don't understand how the world works. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Victor's. The world may be cruel, but Eleanor knew how to use that to her advantage. She left a legacy that will live on far beyond you or me, and if you try to fight it, you'll lose more than money. You'll lose everything. The tension in the room was palpable. Victor knew Ethan was right. The evidence was irrefutable, but his ambition pushed him not to give up. Then Ethan placed a hand on Victor's shoulder in a gesture surprisingly gentle. You still have a choice, Victor. You can keep trying to beat Eleanor, or you can work with me to create something bigger. You think money is everything, but maybe, just maybe, you can find something different in all this. Victor remained silent. For the first time, he felt the weight of his choices pulling him into an abyss he had dug himself, but he still wasn't ready to give in. I'll think about it, he said, his voice low, as he packed up the documents and laptop. I hope you think fast, Ethan replied, turning toward the door, because time isn't on your side. When Ethan left, Victor stood in the middle of the office, staring at the empty safe. He knew he was at a crossroads, but his survival instinct kept him from admitting defeat. Still, a small, almost imperceptible part of him started to wonder if Eleanor hadn't been right about him all along. Back at his house, Victor sat in his living room, surrounded by the luxury he and Eleanor had amassed over the years. Persian rugs, rare artworks, and impeccably designed furniture filled the space, but for the first time, it all felt empty. The discovery in Eleanor's office had opened a wound he couldn't ignore. With the laptop in his hands, he watched Eleanor's video repeatedly, trying to pick up something he could use to his advantage. But with each viewing, her words sounded less like a provocation and more like a warning. "You did exactly what I expected." The words echoed in his mind as he twisted the wedding band on his finger. Eleanor had always known him deeply, and that was both a blessing and a curse. He knew she had set the perfect trap, but he couldn't see a clear way out. A notification sound from the laptop broke his thoughts. It was an automatically sent email from one of Eleanor's accounts, programmed to arrive at that exact moment. The subject line was simple but heavy. "Time to make your choice, Victor." He opened the email, breathing heavily. Inside was a single link. Hesitantly, he clicked it and was taken to a live broadcast of an event at one of Eleanor's philanthropic foundations. Ethan was there, surrounded by journalists and influential philanthropists, announcing a new scholarship program, funded by part of her inheritance. Victor's blood boiled. Ethan was making moves, solidifying Eleanor's vision as if it were his own. He couldn't let that continue. Without much thought, Victor picked up the phone and called Paul Gardner, the lawyer. "Paul, I'm contesting the will. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs." His voice was firm, but inside he fought against his own doubt. Paul sighed on the other end of the line. "Victor, I'll be honest with you. Eleanor knew you'd do this. She left enough evidence to protect her decision. This won't be easy." "I'm not asking for easy, Paul. I'm asking to win." Paul reluctantly agreed, and the two scheduled a meeting for the next day. Later that night, Emily showed up at Victor's house. He had called her to discuss what he had found in Eleanor's office, but as she entered with her flawless blonde hair and that same familiar gaze, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of distrust. "So, did you find anything?" she asked, sitting on the couch and crossing her legs. "Eleanor knew everything, Emily. She had proof of us. Photos, videos. She even hired a detective to investigate me." Emily didn't seem surprised. She leaned forward slightly. "That's a problem, of course, but maybe it's something we can turn against Ethan." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Turn it against him? How?" Emily smiled faintly, but there was something unsettling about her expression. "Eleanor trusted him, right? Maybe more than she should have. If we can find something to compromise Ethan, we can destabilize his control over the inheritance." Victor shook his head, exasperated. "Ethan is clean, Emily. Eleanor knew it. That's the problem. He's the moral mirror she wanted to project." Emily leaned back, studying Victor closely before changing the subject. "What about you? Any ideas about what to do with what you found in the safe?" Victor hesitated. He knew Emily was a valuable ally, but there was something about her recent words and actions that made him uncomfortable. Her intentions weren't clear, and suddenly he realized that maybe Eleanor wasn't the only one playing the long game. When Emily left later that day, Victor found himself alone again, staring at the laptop on the table. Eleanor's actions had sent a clear message. He was being watched. The game was bigger than he had imagined, and the players were far more numerous. That night, while the city slept under the soft glow of its lights, Victor made a dangerous decision to find out just how far Eleanor had gone to protect him from himself, and how far he would go to regain control. Victor woke up early, his heart already racing with the day's possibilities. He needed to act fast, to find something, anything that could turn the game in his favor. Doubts about Emily's loyalty weighed heavily on his mind, but for now, she was a necessary piece on the board. At a meeting with Paul Gardner, the lawyer explained the nuances of Eleanor's will. Eleanor had a team of lawyers who knew the loopholes of the law inside and out, Victor. She took every possible precaution to make sure the will was airtight. If we want to contest it, we'll need very strong evidence that she wasn't of sound mind when she made the changes. Victor laughed sarcastically, leaning back in his chair. "Eleanor was always 3 steps ahead of everyone. You know as well as I do that she was perfectly lucid until the very end." Paul remained silent, clearly uncomfortable. "There's another possibility," Victor continued, his gaze sharp. "What if Ethan was involved in something dirty? Some hidden reason behind Eleanor's trust in him?" Paul hesitated, then responded cautiously. "Ethan is nearly impeccable, Victor, but no one's perfect. If you want to dig into it, I can put someone on it." Victor nodded, satisfied. "Do it, and fast." Later, Victor met with Emily at a discreet restaurant, far from Seattle's curious eyes. She looked radiant, but he no longer viewed her presence with the same enthusiasm. Something about her felt off. "I managed to talk to someone close to Ethan," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "It looks like he's planning to expand the use of the inheritance into a new foundation, a massive project." Victor leaned in, intrigued. "Expand how?" "He wants to use part of the fund to finance sustainable startups and social impact projects. It sounds altruistic, but if you look closely, It could be a way for him to consolidate power and influence. Victor looked at her skeptically. "And you think we can use that against him?" Emily smiled. "I don't think. I'm certain." For a moment, Victor felt tempted to trust her, but something about that overconfidence seemed wrong. That night, while reviewing documents retrieved from Eleanor's vault, Victor found a signed contract between Ethan and a renowned international consulting firm. The document detailed Ethan's plans to manage the philanthropic donations, but as Victor read more closely, he noticed something curious. The terms of the contract didn't allow Ethan to personally profit from any of the projects. This completely unraveled the narrative Emily had been trying to build. Ethan truly seemed aligned with Eleanor's values. He wasn't exploiting her legacy, as Victor and Emily had believed. Victor's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "Don't trust Emily, she's playing for another team." Victor felt a chill run down his spine. The message was short, but its impact was deep. Who could have sent it? Ethan? One of Eleanor's allies? Or maybe Eleanor herself had left something programmed to warn him. He tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. "Damn it," he muttered, gripping the phone tightly. On instinct, he decided to check Eleanor's digital files on her laptop again. There, in a folder he hadn't opened before, he found something that made him freeze, a full dossier on Emily. It contained records of her past relationships, all with wealthy and influential men, and in each case, she had left behind a trail of financial and emotional destruction. Victor began to realize that Eleanor knew exactly who Emily was, and had likely left this evidence there on purpose. "You always underestimated my vision, Victor. Be careful." The phrase from the photo echoed in his mind again. Victor felt the anger rising within him. He grabbed his phone and called Emily, his voice tense. "We need to talk now." Emily hesitated but agreed to meet him at her apartment. When he arrived, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You knew all along, didn't you? You knew Eleanor had evidence against me, and against you too." Emily tried to stay calm, but the tension was visible on her face. "What are you talking about, Victor?" He threw the dossier's documents onto the table. "I'm talking about this. Eleanor knew who you were, and now I know too. You weren't helping me. You were using me, just like you did with everyone else." Emily took a step back, her face hardening. "And what are you going to do about it?" Victor smiled, but it was cold. "I haven't decided yet, but one thing's for sure. You're not going to take me down." Emily crossed her arms, her gaze defiant. "Careful, Victor, you're fighting more enemies than you realize." As she spoke, Victor realized he had crossed a dangerous line. With every step he took, it became clearer that Eleanor's legacy was just the beginning of something much bigger, and that he might be playing a game he couldn't win. Victor left Emily's apartment, his mind spinning. What had started as a simple dispute over an inheritance now seemed like a complex web of betrayals and secrets. Eleanor, even in death, seemed to be everywhere, pulling the invisible strings of his life. Ethan, Emily, and now even himself, all of them were entangled in something far greater than they had anticipated. That night he returned home and revisited Eleanor's journal. Her words carried a different weight now. "You don't know what's coming." It wasn't just a warning, but a declaration of intent. Eleanor had planned every detail to test the limits of his ambition. Among the scribbled pages, Victor found another clue, a note about a rural property outside the city. Havenfield, a refuge for what matters. Victor had never heard of the place before. A quick search through his financial records revealed the property was registered in Eleanor's name. It appeared to be remote, with no records of frequent visits or recent activity. Driven by curiosity, he decided to investigate it personally. The next morning, Victor drove for nearly 2 hours until he arrived. Havenfield was a modest house, surrounded by tall trees and open fields, a stark contrast to Eleanor's luxurious urban style. Inside, he found a warm but simple atmosphere. Rustic furniture, old black and white photographs, and a sense of serenity filled the space. In the main room, above an unlit fireplace, there was a large painting of a young Eleanor, smiling beside a man Victor vaguely recognized, her first husband, who had died years ago. In the center of the room, on a wooden table, there was an envelope with his name handwritten on it. Eleanor's handwriting was unmistakable. With trembling fingers, he opened the envelope and found a letter. "Victor, if you've made it this far, it means you're still searching for answers. This place represents everything that matters to me. Simplicity, purpose, and a legacy that isn't measured in dollars but in impact. You and I have always had different goals. You wanted control, power. I wanted something that would last beyond our lives. But despite our disagreements, I still believe there's hope for you. I hope this journey makes you see what truly matters. Havenfield is yours. if you choose to use it for something greater than yourself. Eleanor. Victor read the letter several times, feeling something he didn't immediately recognize, a mix of guilt and shame. Eleanor hadn't just been trying to protect her fortune, she wanted him to change. But along with the shame came anger. Why did she insist on manipulating him even after her death? Why did she think she knew what was best for him? As Victor processed Eleanor's words, his phone rang. It was Paul Gardner. "Victor, I need you to come to my office immediately. Something important has happened." Back in Seattle, Paul received him with a grave expression. "Ethan just publicly announced that he's transferring the fund's assets into a global social impact project. He's holding a press conference tomorrow." Victor clenched his fists. "He's consolidating everything, exactly as Eleanor planned." Paul shook his head. "It's not that simple. If he goes through with this, it'll be practically impossible to overturn the will. Ethan is legally shielding everything and rallying public opinion." Victor knew he had to act fast. He spent the night devising a plan. If he wanted to turn the tables, he had to strike at Ethan directly, something that could discredit him and weaken his position. The next morning, while Ethan delivered his speech to a room packed with journalists, Victor walked into the hall drawing curious glances. He waited patiently until Ethan finished and the Q&A session began. Standing up, Victor spoke loudly, interrupting the flow of the press conference. "Ethan, why don't you talk about how much you're profiting indirectly from this fund? How many shady contracts have you signed to secure your control?" The room fell silent. Ethan, visibly surprised, took a step toward Victor. "Victor, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm more than willing to clear up any doubts." Victor smiled, but the gesture was ice cold. "I doubt Eleanor would have approved of your decisions. She trusted you, but it seems you're using her legacy to promote yourself." Ethan stared at Victor, his eyes shining with determination. "You think you know everything, Victor, but you understand nothing. Eleanor trusted me because she knew I would honor what she wanted, something you were never able to do. This isn't about control, it's about purpose." The verbal exchange felt like a sword fight, each word loaded with implications. But to the public, it became clear who appeared more honest. Victor tried to continue, but the silence in the room was a clear reminder that he was losing the battle of the narrative. As he left the venue, defeated and burdened by past choices, one question loomed in his mind. Was it too late to change? The door to Victor's apartment shut with a sharp thud. He tossed the keys onto the table and collapsed onto the couch, consumed by physical and emotional exhaustion. The press conference had been a disaster. Ethan had emerged victorious once again, with unwavering composure and a flawless speech that reinforced Eleanor's vision. Victor's hand trembled as he picked up the whiskey glass on the side table. The amber liquid seemed like his only momentary relief. Taking the first sip, his gaze landed again on Eleanor's journal, which he had brought home. Her words continued to haunt him. "I hope this journey helps you see what truly matters." He sighed, running a hand over his face. For the first time, he began to admit the possibility that Eleanor had been wiser than he was willing to accept. Ethan didn't seem interested in manipulating the inheritance. He genuinely believed in her legacy. Emily, on the other hand, had disappeared after the confrontation in the apartment. Victor didn't know whether she was retreating or planning another move. As his thoughts spiraled, a notification on his phone caught his attention. It was an anonymous message, short but direct. "The truth is in Havenfield. Go back there." Victor hesitated, considering the possibility of a trap, but something inside him pushed him forward. It was as if Eleanor were pulling the strings once again, guiding him to his next move. Returning to Havenfield at dawn, Victor found the house immersed in the silence of the countryside. He walked through the rooms, hoping to find something he had missed before. In the library, he discovered a small wooden box hidden beneath a loose shelf. Inside the box was a letter and a small camcorder. He picked up the letter first. It was another message from Eleanor, but the tone was more personal, almost intimate. "Victor, I knew you'd come back here. From the start, you've always searched for answers, even if you never fully accepted them. I want you to see something I've kept especially for you. It's not meant to hurt, but to reveal. Sometimes we need to face the truth to set ourselves free. With love, Eleanor." Victor turned on the camcorder, his heart racing. The video began with Eleanor sitting in the same room where he now stood. She was alone, looking directly into the camera. "Victor, if you're watching this, it means you haven't given up yet. I want you to know I never wanted to destroy you. Everything I did was to protect something bigger than both of us." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I loved you, Victor. I truly did. But I watched your ambition grow like a shadow, suffocating everything around you. Even so, I believed there was something good in you, something that could change if it was challenged. Victor felt his eyes burn, but he didn't allow himself to cry. This place, Havenfield, was where I built my vision for the future. Here, I hope you find the same purpose. Use this, Victor, not to destroy, but to create. The video ended with Eleanor smiling, a gesture that completely disarmed him. He stood still for long minutes, holding the camcorder, trying to absorb everything he had just seen. That night, Victor made a decision. He returned to Seattle and called Paul Gardner for an urgent meeting. "Paul, I'm withdrawing the will contest." Paul looked at him surprised. "Are you sure about this?" Victor nodded, his voice steadier than he expected. "Eleanor was right. Ethan is right too. I spent so much time trying to control everything that I forgot what really mattered. I want to be part of this." Paul smiled slightly, a rare gesture. "That's something I didn't expect to hear from you, Victor." A few days later, Victor arranged to meet with Ethan. They met at Havenfield, where the peaceful environment seemed to dissolve any lingering tensions. "I thought you'd never give in," Ethan said as they walked through the fields. "Life has a funny way of teaching us, Ethan. Eleanor was always smarter than I was. I guess it was time for me to admit that." Ethan stopped and looked at Victor, gauging his sincerity. "If this is really what you want, I can work with you, but it will be on Eleanor's terms and timeline." Victor nodded. "Agreed, I don't want to fight what she built anymore. I want to help carry it forward." As unlikely as it seemed, the two shook hands, sealing the start of a partnership. Over time, Victor began getting involved in the philanthropic projects. Slowly, he realized that the purpose Eleanor had so often spoken of wasn't some empty ideal, but something that could fill the void he carried within himself. Havenfield became the center of many of these efforts, a symbol of Eleanor's legacy and what Victor was trying to build. Although the ghosts of the past never completely disappeared, Victor began to find something he never imagined he could have: peace. The weeks that followed were a test for Victor. Entering the philanthropic world alongside Ethan was like stepping into uncharted territory, full of challenges and lessons. Ethan, always cautious, kept a close eye on Victor's intentions, but also acknowledged the signs of change. Victor started visiting schools funded by the foundation, environmental projects in underserved communities, and public health initiatives in neglected areas. At first, he did it out of obligation, an attempt to redeem his image and perhaps carve out a new position of power. But with each visit, something began to change within him. One of those moments happened at a small school in southern Seattle. Victor entered the newly renovated library and found a little girl about 8 years old sitting alone, flipping through a book on astronomy. He approached her, curious. "What are you reading?" he asked, kneeling to her level. The girl looked up at him with a shy smile and held up the book, showing him the cover. "It's about stars. I want to be an astronomer when I grow up." Victor smiled, surprised by her answer. "That's a beautiful dream. What would you do as an astronomer?" "I'd discover new things in space," she replied, with a conviction that caught him off guard. He was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the simplicity and sincerity of her response. Something inside him, a long-forgotten, buried part, reacted to that purity. As he left the school that day, Victor realized that the world Eleanor had tried so hard to protect, this world of dreams, opportunities, and possible futures, was bigger than any personal ambition. Back at Havenfield, Victor began reflecting on the mistakes he had made. He decided that if he truly wanted to change, he would need to face his past actions. That included confronting Emily. After weeks without any news, he finally managed to set up a meeting with her. They met at a discreet cafe in downtown Seattle. Emily was visibly more cautious, but still carried the same measured charm as always. "You disappeared," Victor said as she sat down. "I thought you needed space, and honestly I did too," Emily replied, fidgeting with the strap of her bag. Victor observed her for a moment before speaking. "Eleanor knew who you were from the very beginning. She left proof, I know too." Emily looked up, her expression turning hard. "And what are you going to do about it, Victor? Expose me? Destroy my life?" He shook his head. "No, that's not what I want." Emily laughed, but the sound was bitter. "Since when are you the forgiving type?" "I'm trying to be better," Victor replied, his calm tone seeming to disarm her. "Eleanor left me something greater than money, Emily, and I'm going to honor that." She stayed silent, processing his words. After a few moments, she sighed and relaxed in her chair. "I hope you can, Victor, but trust me, this world isn't kind to people who try to change." Victor watched her leave, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Despite everything, Emily had been his accomplice in his worst moments, and now she seemed to be following an equally uncertain path. Victor's next big step was attending a public meeting about new projects led by Ethan. It was an important occasion, With investors, journalists, and community members present, Victor knew he needed to show his commitment in a definitive way. Ethan kicked off the presentation with his usual enthusiasm, talking about the new educational and environmental projects. When it was Victor's turn to speak, he stood up, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. For years, I dedicated my life to ambition, power, and control. I thought that was all that mattered. But Eleanor showed me, in a way only she could, that there's something much bigger. He paused, looking at Ethan, who appeared surprised but pleased with Victor's sincerity. I'm not here to undo my mistakes. Some of them are unforgivable, but I'm here to do what's right. I want these projects to be more than just a tribute to Eleanor's legacy. They should be a symbol that even the most flawed among us can change. The room erupted in applause. For the first time, Victor felt like he wasn't pretending. He was, in fact, committed. Over the months, Victor continued working side by side with Ethan. Havenfield became the heart of their philanthropic efforts, with Victor dedicating his time and resources to expanding the projects. Gradually, he began to realize that the emptiness he'd felt couldn't be filled with wealth or status, but with purpose. Though the path to redemption was long, Victor now understood that Eleanor hadn't just planned to protect her legacy, she'd also given him a second chance. On a sunny afternoon in Havenfield, as he watched a group of children playing at a community event, Victor felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Victor Bailey, the man who had once put ambition above all else, was now a living part of Eleanor's legacy. He finally understood what she'd always meant. True wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share. Did you enjoy this touching story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more incredible stories like this one. We post almost every day, and you can now click on the links appearing on your screen to explore other stories full of twists and life lessons. See you next time!